In an old suburban apartment, Mary Adams was repeatedly reading the last email from her daughter. Why don't you understand my fight for social justice? 6 months ago, these words marked the last communication with Linda after an intense argument over her whistleblowing article on medical issues. 3 days ago, a sudden call came from a private accident handling company. The man's message was cold and clerical. Linda Adams has died in a traffic accident. Due to severe damage to the body, viewing her face will be. While slipping into a black dress, Mary held back tears, regretting their unresolved goodbye. The chapel was enveloped in early morning silence as mourners gradually gathered. Mary stood in front of the altar, placing her hand on the closed coffin, whispering, "I'm sorry, Linda." Then, a faint cry was heard, turning around. A young boy around 5 or 6 was kneeling and trembling before the coffin. He was a stranger to Mary. "Mommy," he whispered softly. "This isn't your mommy. Your real mommy is alive." "She must be." Mary's spine chilled. The boy's words pierced deep into her heart. What did this child know? Why did he call Linda mommy? And why was he saying the person in the coffin wasn't Linda? A middle-aged man hurried over to the boy. "Tommy, are you all right?" "Excuse me." Mary spoke up. "Your child just called my daughter mommy." "I'm James Brown," the man responded quietly, with a look of wanting to say more. "I met Linda at a homeless support center where I am the director." James hesitated with his words and, after a brief pause, continued. "Linda used to visit often for her reporting and really adored Tommy. He grew fond of her and started calling her mommy. So, he was calling my daughter mommy earlier." Tommy approached the coffin again and gently touched it. "My mom has a heart-shaped burn mark on her right hand. She got it baking a cake on my birthday. But this person has no such mark. So, this can't be my mommy. My mommy must be alive." Then, a voice from behind. "You're Linda's mother, right?" Turning around, Mary saw a tall man she didn't recognize. "I'm David Collins. Linda and I were colleagues." With a gentle smile, David spoke haltingly with a touch of sadness. "Recently, I had finally become close to her, going out to eat, then this happened." David choked up, sighing deeply, touching Mary deeply that someone had such feelings for her daughter. Mrs. Adams, in such a tough time to be alone. "Let me accompany you." David smiled gently and placed his hand on Mary's shoulder. "Mr. Brown, Tommy, thank you for your kindness. From now on, I'll be accompanying Mrs. Adams." Tommy started to say something, but James quietly held his son's shoulder. David began to speak in a soft voice as he guided Mary. "I've heard about that boy from Linda." Glancing around, David lowered his voice. "She was concerned about him lately. He sometimes talks of fantasies like that." Confused, Mary found David's demeanor gentlemanly and convincing, touching her with his care for Linda. "So, the burn story too?" "Yes." David's face took on a sorrowful expression. "Tommy just can't accept that he won't see Linda again. Accepting death is especially hard for children." Men in black approached. "It's time for the burial." David gently supported Mary's shoulder. "Don't strain yourself. This is reality." The funeral proceeded solemnly, and Linda was buried. But that night, a knock on Mary's door. Tommy and James stood there. "Could we talk?" James asked seriously. Hesitant, Mary recalled David's words about fantasies. Could she trust these late-night visitors? Yet, James' earnest gaze and Tommy's wistful expression seemed urgent. "Please come in." Mary paused for a moment and then swung the door wide open. For now, it would be best to listen to their story. Even if it might be just a fantasy, as David had suggested. "Excuse us." James held Tommy's hand and quietly entered the living room. "We won't take much of your time, but there's something we must show you." In the living room, James pulled out his smartphone. "After hearing Tommy's words at the funeral, I desperately searched for any proof. Then I found this video." The phone showed Linda preparing for Tommy's birthday party, chatting and laughing with Tommy while making pancakes. At one point, her hand touched the pan, and she quickly retracted it with a yelp. "Look, this photo afterward also." James scrolled through the screen. Various photos taken afterward clearly showed the heart-shaped burn mark on Linda's right hand. Videos of shopping trips, pictures from the park, all captured that distinctive scar. Mary gasped. The body she saw at the funeral definitely lacked this scar. This scar, it's clearly visible. Mary peered into the smartphone. But why? Linda was gathering evidence of illegal experiments by a pharmaceutical company. James said in a hushed tone. Homeless people were disappearing one after another. And those who returned seemed like entirely different people. Tommy clung to his father's arm. Mommy tried to help everyone. But they noticed her. Mary's hands trembled. The last email from my daughter spoke of her fight for social justice. James nodded. Linda told me to stop managing the center because it was dangerous. But we couldn't just abandon the homeless people. Tommy clung to his father's arm. And as James gently stroked his small back, he continued. Then she disappeared. And suddenly we were told she had died. Mary stood up and picked up the phone. David will surely cooperate. What? On the other end, David sounded surprised. Was Tommy's story true? Then, he quickly changed his tone. Of course, I'll help. We must uncover the truth for Linda's sake. Mary felt hopeful, relieved to have a reliable ally nearby. Meanwhile, after hanging up, David dialed another number with a grim expression. Yes, they've started moving as expected. I'll continue to monitor them. However, I want an increase in my fee. After all, deceiving Linda's mother is proving to be quite a challenge. The next day, Mary visited the newspaper office where Linda worked. David had arranged for her to meet Linda's colleagues. Linda was often out late recently, a young reporter said. Chasing a story about the homeless. Yes. Another reporter nodded. The last time I saw her, she seemed very tired. But she was excited about writing a big article. David joined in. The day before the accident, I visited her room. But it had been ransacked. That must have been worrying. Mary impulsively touched David's arm. Excuse me for interrupting, a person who seemed to be the editor approached. You're Linda's mother, right? We need to tidy up her desk. Her belongings. David quickly stood up. Let me handle it. I'll assist Mrs. Adams. As they moved to Linda's desk, everything was neatly arranged. Her notebooks were stacked by type. And pens were sorted by color, typical of her meticulous work. Oh. Mary discovered a note with a scribbled address. David peered over. Ah, that area has many homeless people. Linda used to go there for her reporting. This address. Mary whispered. Is it near the homeless support center? David's expression stiffened for a moment but quickly returned to a soft smile. Let's check it out. I'll accompany you. Just then, a young reporter hurried over. It's terrible. Someone has deleted all the data from Linda's computer. Mary caught David's side profile, who, without changing his expression, said, Is that so? Let's check it immediately. His perfect response, without any sign of panic, caught Mary off guard. Let's go to this address right away, David suggested. But first, I want to check Linda's room. The one you said was ransacked. Right now? David seemed momentarily taken aback. Yes. We might find something in my daughter's room. David thought for a moment, then nodded. Understood. Let's go there. When they arrived at Linda's apartment, the room indeed showed signs of having been searched. However, Mary felt something was off. Papers were scattered, but the computer and valuables were intact. It seemed like it was ransacked with a specific objective in mind. As Mary opened the drawers of Linda's desk, she found a photo hidden at the bottom. It showed a figure recording data among homeless people gathered at a location. Scribbled on the back of the photo were a date and the word experiment. Just as she was about to take the photo, David spoke up. Did you find anything? Yes, just a photo. Mary quickly slipped the photo into an envelope to conceal it from him. But to see my daughter's room ransacked like this. David sighed as he looked around the room. I've reported it to the police, but there hasn't been any progress. At that moment, Mary's cell phone rang. It was a message from James. I have important information. Please come alone. Sorry, I have a sudden errand. Mary stood up. Shall we call it a day then? David looked slightly dissatisfied but quickly returned to a gentle smile. Of course. Maybe tomorrow. After leaving the room, Mary hurried to the meeting place. At a small cafe, James and Tommy were waiting. At the cafe table, James began speaking in a hushed voice. Please look at this photo. James presented his smartphone. In a dimly lit warehouse, several homeless people lay on makeshift beds. Beside them, people in lab coats were recording something. Linda said this was a room in an old research facility owned by a pharmaceutical company, and that dangerous experiments were being conducted there. And she was gathering evidence. Experiments? Mary pulled out the photo she had found earlier. It depicted the same scene James had shown on his phone. Indeed, there have been rumors lately of homeless people disappearing one after another. And those who returned seemed to have lost their memories. Linda mentioned that they might be using socially vulnerable people for human experiments to develop a drug that manipulates consciousness. At that moment, the cafe door opened, and standing there was David. Oh, Mrs. Adams, he said, his eyes wide. You seemed in a hurry earlier, but you were still nearby. David. Mary stood up. I had a sudden matter to attend to. I did as well. David continued. I got a call from the police. There's new information about Linda's accident. About the accident? Yes. If it's okay, may I talk to you about it? Mary glanced briefly at James and Tommy. David's eyes caught the envelope on the table. May we join you? James stood up. We were also close to Linda. David's expression stiffened slightly. Well, the police said. Please. James said earnestly. She was like a mother to Tommy. The gaze of other cafe patrons could be felt. David hesitated for a moment but then sighed softly. All right. Let's go in my car. As they got into the car, Tommy curled up nervously on James's lap. As they drove into an increasingly deserted industrial area, the atmosphere inside the car grew heavier. "Daddy, I'm scared," Tommy whispered in a small voice. James held his son while staring out the car window. They continued into the increasingly deserted industrial area. Mary watched David's expression change through the rearview mirror. His hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel. Suddenly, David braked sharply, causing Tommy to let out a small scream. "David, this road." Mary spoke up as the car swerved abruptly. "Sorry." David's voice was unusually low. "Taking a shortcut." The car shook on the rough road, and Tommy's face looked like he might cry. James and Mary exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. This road led to the place where Linda's accident occurred. "Are we really going to the police?" Mary asked cautiously. "The police are not involved," David stated flatly, his voice lacking its previous kindness. The car stopped in front of a dimly lit warehouse. From the windows of the building, which looked like a ruin, something shimmered. Mary caught her breath with anxiety. "Please get out." David's voice had a commanding tone. "Daddy," Tommy called out with a trembling voice. In James's arms, the young boy shivered. At that moment, Mary reached into her handbag to grab something, and David instinctively turned around. Seizing the opportunity, James opened the door, and Mary followed. "Run." The three of them ran desperately through the darkness. Behind them, the sound of the door being violently opened echoed. David's shouts rang out. "Wait. Don't you want to know where Linda is?" Mary's steps nearly halted. What did he mean by her whereabouts? Could it be that her daughter was still alive? "Mary, it's dangerous to listen to that man. We need to hurry. All the evidence should be inside this building." James grasped her arm. Echoes of footsteps and shouts filled the deserted industrial zone. Clutching the photos in the envelope as she ran, Mary followed James and Tommy into an old warehouse, where they hid behind stacked crates. "Did you find it?" David's voice echoed at the building's entrance. "Not yet. We'll split up and search," another man replied. Multiple footsteps entered the building. In the darkness, Mary held her breath, Tommy trembling softly beside her as James gently soothed his son's back. The footsteps drew nearer, then faded away. When the noise finally stopped, James stood up and pointed down a dim corridor, where a rusty iron door with B1 marked on it was visible. "Underground," Mary whispered. "Yes. The evidence must be here." James nodded. "You seem very familiar with this building. Have you been here before?" "No. But Linda showed me the blueprints. She told me, if anything happens to me, remember everything about this building." She was convinced that something was going on here. Mary felt a chill down her spine from her daughter's cautious actions. It was indeed a dangerous place. "Let's go." When Mary said, "Before we do, there's something Linda entrusted me with that you should see. It's dangerous to go into the basement without knowing this. I intended to show it at the cafe, but..." James pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "Linda said, if anything happens to me, make sure my mother sees this." Mary reached for the envelope handed to her, marked in her daughter's meticulous handwriting, "To Mother." In the dim light, Mary opened the trembling envelope. Inside, Linda's letter appeared under the faint flashlight beam. Mother, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. The pharmaceutical company is using homeless people. For human experiments, I've got evidence. Data tampering, illegal drug administration, and numerous cover-ups. I met James while reporting. He told me about the homeless people who suddenly disappear. Investigating led me to this warehouse. The experiments are conducted underground. And David is a monitor hired by the company. If you're reading this, head to the underground lab. All the evidence is there: records, data, and testimonies of the homeless. The full scope of the experiment can be revealed. But be careful, they'll do anything to protect this evidence. Footsteps, James whispered. Mary quickly folded the letter. The sound of approaching leather shoes grew louder. Tommy buried his face in his father's chest. Check this floor, a man's voice commanded. Ordered footsteps spread throughout the warehouse. Back here, James motioned. They moved silently through the darkness. Only several feet from the door marked B1. Mary clutched the letter in the envelope to her chest. The truth her daughter had discovered, the evidence hidden in this basement. A metallic click sounded. Someone had opened the opposite door. We're almost there. James's voice trembled. There's a staircase just beyond this door. Footsteps were rapidly approaching. The beam of a flashlight sliced through the darkness. Wait, Mary whispered softly. Let's hide. They slipped behind stacked crates, just as the footsteps passed by. Nothing here either. Check the upper floors. They must still be inside. In the darkness, Mary could hear her own heartbeat. Tommy gripped his father's shirt tightly. Once the footsteps receded, the trio approached the iron door. Can you open it? Mary whispered. James grasped the handle, applying gentle pressure. The old door opened surprisingly quietly. Beyond lay a dim staircase. They descended cautiously, Mary clutching the letter, each step carefully measured. A low humming, like the sound of machinery, emanated from below. That noise. It's experimental equipment. Linda said it's still operational. At the staircase's end, a sterile white corridor illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights stretched ahead, reminiscent of a hospital. The lab is at the end. But be careful. There are surveillance cameras. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded from above. Someone was coming down the stairs. Hurry. James pointed down a side corridor of the white hallway, quickly pulling Mary into a storeroom. They slipped into the storeroom just as the footsteps descended the stairs. The cramped space was cluttered with cleaning supplies and old cardboard boxes. Mary covered her mouth with both hands. Through the crack of the door, shadows stretched across the corridor. Is the data deletion complete? Asked a man's voice, not David's. Yes, mostly, a woman answered. But the backup is. Find it. Whatever Linda hid, it must be here. Mary gasped. The evidence written about. In the letter, her daughter had indeed left something here. Tommy called out in a soft voice. Mommy said. James quickly covered his son's mouth. But Tommy shook his head and pointed to the back wall of the storeroom. Mary strained her eyes and noticed a slightly different colored patch. A square mark, the tile seemed newly replaced. Waiting for the voices outside to fade, Mary approached the tile. It was slightly ajar upon touching. Is this? James reached out and the tile smoothly came off, revealing a small USB drive hidden behind it. That's why Linda told me about this place. James's voice trailed off as footsteps approached again. Check the storeroom too. The three held their breath. If the door were opened now. Mary gripped the USB drive. The evidence her daughter had risked her life to protect. The doorknob turned slowly. Tommy trembled quietly, and James hugged his son. Just then, a loud noise came from upstairs. What was that noise? From upstairs. Maybe they've come back. Damn, go upstairs. The footsteps hurried back up the staircase. We were just seconds from being discovered. Mary exhaled shakily and closed her eyes briefly in gratitude. We're safe for now, James whispered. But we need to move quickly. Mary came to her senses and checked the USB drive in her hand, packed with Linda's truths. Let's get out of here. Mary stood up. They had to reach the truth at all costs. At that moment, I've found you. An unfamiliar woman appeared in front of them. Mary's spine chilled. Tommy almost cried out, but James held him tightly. It's okay. The woman opened her arms slowly and approached. I'm Susan Collins, a researcher. I'm here too. What did you make on Sunday morning? James interrupted suddenly. Mary looked at him, confused. Susan's expression softened. Pancakes. With Tommy's favorite chocolate sauce. And Tommy's nickname? Kitchen Angel. James's shoulders relaxed. Never thought the insider ally Linda mentioned was real. What do you mean? Mary raised her voice in confusion. James explained quietly. Linda told me about an ally inside the organization. She didn't reveal who to protect them but instructed me to ask those questions. If we suspected someone, the correct answers would confirm they were our ally. As she had instructed. Exactly, and I'm that ally. After giving an untroubled smile, Susan continued while checking her surroundings. Linda is alive, in a different building on this site. Suddenly, noise from upstairs echoed again. Hurry. Susan walked briskly down the corridor, pulling car keys from her lab coat pocket. There's a back exit. We can escape in my car. But what about Linda? Mary blurted out. It's not possible now. Security is too tight. Susan explained as they descended the stairs. First, I'll get you to a safe place. Anne. She glanced at the USB drive in Mary's hand. That evidence is crucial. We need to secure and review it to help rescue Linda. After passing through the dark corridor, there was a metal door leading to the back exit. Susan carefully opened the door, and in the shadow of the old warehouse, a car was parked. Take this car to the city. As Susan was about to open the passenger door, Mary instinctively grabbed her arm. Is Linda really? Susan looked back at her earnestly. She's strong. She mentions your name every day, saying, Mother will surely notice. Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. Beside her, Tommy spoke up in a small voice. Can we see Mommy? Yes, definitely. Just then, shouts came from inside the building. Hurry. Susan opened the back seat door. Tommy, sit in the middle. Try to stay as low as possible so you won't be found. As they got into the car, Susan started the engine. It's 40 minutes to the city. I'll explain as much as I can about the situation during that time. As the car drove out of the dark industrial area, Mary couldn't organize her thoughts. David was supposed to be close to her daughter. Why then did he bring us here? Actually, I am the chief researcher at the pharmaceutical company. Susan began, speaking through the rearview mirror. Last year, illegal human experiments using homeless people started. Linda learned about it and came to conduct an investigative report. At first, I hesitated to cooperate. But after witnessing the inhumanity of the experiments, I couldn't just stand by anymore. They really did anything. Susan's voice grew darker. The homeless people used as test subjects. Those who went missing. And since Linda got the evidence, the surveillance. Was David the monitor? Mary asked with a trembling voice. Yes. A spy hired by the company. His role was to get close to Linda and gather information. No way. He told me he had a good relationship with Linda. A good relationship? That's a lie. After all, Linda was with James. A heavy silence fell inside the car. Through the rearview mirror, James's puzzled expression could be seen. I'm sorry. James spoke quietly. I should have told you earlier. I met Linda when she came to interview the homeless. Initially, it was just a reporter-subject relationship, but gradually. She said, I will tell my mother properly when the time comes. So that was it. But why has everything suddenly come to this? Mary began to say, but Susan lowered her voice and continued to explain. A week ago, Linda got decisive evidence. Susan paused, choosing her words carefully while driving. They've been holding her captive, trying to find out where the evidence is. Is she really alive? James's voice was tense. Yes. In a building's basement nearby. They use drugs daily to make her groggy, trying to get information from her. That's unforgivable. Mary's fists trembled. But there's still hope. Susan continued as the lights of the city began to appear on the road. Linda pretends to take the drugs. Her mind is clear. And if we publicize what's inside that USB? Yes. But where can we go now? Going back home is dangerous, right? Mary mentioned, and Susan nodded. Yes, they are definitely after us. But don't worry. Linda had prepared a place, a safe apartment that nobody knows about. As the car entered a quiet residential area, the lights of the city around them. Tommy woke up and looked around anxiously at the unfamiliar scenery. Mary instinctively looked back. It's okay. With those words, Tommy smiled at Mary for the first time. And nodded slightly before closing his eyes again in his father's arms. Susan parked the car behind an old apartment building. The night had deepened, and the residential area was quiet. This is the room. Susan opened the door to a room on the 4th floor. I rented this half a year ago at Linda's request. It was necessary to keep her investigative materials in a safe place. I never thought we'd use it like this. The room, though small, was neatly organized. A laptop sat on the desk. And investigative files were lined up on a bookshelf. Mary caught her breath. Even here, her daughter's meticulous nature was evident. I'll start the computer. Susan moved towards the desk. Let's check what's on the USB. James, still carrying Tommy who had fallen asleep in the car, headed towards the sofa. Mary found a blanket on the bookshelf and gently offered it. The tension of the long day seemed to melt away from the young boy's sleeping face. While James laid Tommy down, Susan faced the computer screen. The contents of the USB memory began to open one by one. This is. Susan's voice trembled. Records of the experiments, data on the subjects, and Mary and James leaned in to see secret documents from the pharmaceutical company arrayed on the screen. Unauthorized drug trials, cover-ups of deaths, and documents showing the flow of substantial research funds. The evidence Linda risked her life to gather. But that's not all. She also recorded testimonies from those who survived the experiments and backed them up. So she's being held captive. Mary's fists trembled. Yes, but with this data, the police will have to act. And I can testify as a researcher who was involved in the experiments. Mary looked at Susan's profile. Being involved as a researcher meant she could also be held accountable. Yet Mary was moved by her resolve to reveal the truth for her daughter and for those who had been sacrificed. Now, it's all about timing the rescue, James said, looking over at Tommy, who was sleeping. We need to plan carefully, for Linda's sake. First, I'll contact the police myself. As an insider, my testimony should add credibility. And the location where Linda is being held. At that moment, the computer screen suddenly switched. A video file opened. What appeared was a dimly lit laboratory. The inhumane scene it displayed almost made Mary look away. This is what Linda found. The date and time of the recording were displayed in the corner of the screen. Just 2 weeks ago. And in the background was this place, Susan said quietly. B5 building's basement. That's where Linda is currently confined. So, along with the evidence, Mary choked up. Her daughter had recorded everything, risking her own life. The problem is the time it will take for the police to act, Susan said, staring at the monitor. I'll report it, but it will take at least a few hours for a warrant to be issued. In the meantime, they might realize and move Linda to another location. In the worst case, they might, to silence her. Susan's voice trailed off, filling the room with a heavy atmosphere. On the sofa, Tommy was breathing peacefully in his sleep. Mary watched his young, innocent face and made up her mind. We can't wait, Mary said quietly but firmly. We might lose our daughter while waiting for the police. I have an idea, James said in a hushed tone. Susan can enter the building without raising suspicion as she is an insider. Then, pose as a night shift researcher. Susan leaned forward. Yes, I can naturally get inside. I'm going to. There was no hesitation in Mary's voice. I will rescue my daughter from that place. But it's too dangerous. Susan frowned. I'm a researcher, so I can enter, but for you to get in, Mary. Susan, I can pretend to be your mother. A mother bringing food to her daughter during a night shift wouldn't be suspicious. That makes sense. Susan's eyes lit up. However, we only have 20 minutes. I know the security rounds at night. So we'll have to time it right. Understood. Mary was ready to play her part in the rescue mission. Let's start planning immediately, Susan whispered. I know the building well, so I can guide us to where Linda is. But I'll come with you, James said assertively. He gently stroked the hair of the sleeping Tommy and continued. I used to practice karate when I was younger. If something happens, I can buy us some time. Mary looked at James, surprised. His usual calm demeanor had hidden such an unexpected side. But what about Tommy? Susan asked worriedly. Sister Maria at the church can take care of him, James replied. She's been watching over Tommy for a while. Even on short notice at night, she'll surely. I'll call her right now. Susan reached for her smartphone. Mary watched the worried expression on Tommy's sleeping face. He was only 6 years old. Leaving such a young child alone was heart-wrenching. But to save Linda. After the call, Susan turned back to Mary and James. Sister Maria has gladly agreed to take him. First, we'll drop off Tommy, then start the operation. The car quietly drove through the night city. As they passed under the streetlights, Tommy's young face would appear briefly. After a while, an old stone church came into view. Sister Maria was already waiting at the main gate, her gentle smile visible beneath her white veil. "Tommy, wake up." James touched his son's cheek. "We'll be with Sister Maria for a little while." Tommy rubbed his eyes and looked around dazedly. "Daddy. I'll come back to pick you up soon." James gently handed Tommy over to Sister Maria. "Thank you so much." "Do not worry," the nun responded quietly. "It is all in God's will." After leaving Tommy with her, the trio headed to the pharmaceutical company's facility. Tension filled the car. Within 20 minutes, Susan reiterated, "Let's time our actions with the shift change of the guards. While I pretend to collect a delivery from my mother, Mary, you will act as the mother to deceive the guards. James, you head to the back door." The building looming in the darkness cast an ominous shadow. The place where Linda was being held. "Before we delete anything, let's make a backup." Susan operated the laptop. "This is our insurance." Inside Mary, anxiety and hope intertwined. Would she be able to see her daughter safely? "Let's go." Susan parked the car. Under the dark night sky, the three began their risky mission. Susan and Mother Mary headed to the front entrance, while James blended into the shadows towards the back door. Now, their desperate plan to rescue Linda had started. Susan walked towards the front entrance with the composed stride of a researcher. Mary, carrying a bag of provisions and maintaining a slight distance, followed. Despite it being an act, embodying a concerned mother was not difficult for her. "Thank you for your hard work." Susan's voice broke the night's stillness. "My mother brought some food for me." Mary offered a natural smile to the guard, who seemed to mind the late-night visit, and added apologetically, "My daughter has been working late nights, so as a mother." The guard, rubbing his sleepy eyes, checked Susan's ID card. Mary's performance seemed to relax him slightly. Then, Susan headed towards the basement. Mary engaged the guard in small talk to keep him distracted. "Really, young people these days are such hard workers. But as a parent, it worries me." Meanwhile, James had circled around to the back of the building. He quietly slipped through an emergency exit that Susan had left unlocked from the inside. Mary glanced at her watch. The agreed 20 minutes were almost up. She stood up and asked, "May I use the restroom?" The guard pointed down the corridor. "Over there." Pretending to head to the restroom, Mary disappeared around the corner and quickly made her way to the staircase. There, she met James, and they descended to the basement. The cold air brushed against their faces, and the smell of disinfectant stung their noses. In the dimly lit corridor, Susan was waiting for them. "Linda is just ahead," Susan whispered. "Be careful. There might be guards on patrol." They moved down the corridor with bated breath. Suddenly, noises from the upper floor made them press against the wall. "The sound of lab coats," Susan murmured softly. Indeed, the sound of clean fabric rubbing together was approaching. Researchers' footsteps. The trio hid in the shadow of a door, holding their breath. Mary felt an icy tension coursing through her veins. Two researchers stopped and started talking right in front of them. That female journalist, she's still keeping silent, huh? Stubborn one. But she'll break soon enough. Once we use that drug. Well, give it a few more days, and it'll all be over. They smirked and walked away. Mary clenched her fists. Her daughter was being subjected to such people. Let's hurry. Susan led the way. The lab is just ahead. In front of a thick iron door, Susan carefully swiped her card key. The lock released. Linda. Mary called out tremulously. In the dimly lit lab, on what looked like an examination table, a woman lay. Mom? A raspy voice responded. Mary rushed over. Linda. Mom, you came. Linda teared up, gripping her mother's hand. But it's dangerous here. It's okay. James approached the two. We will definitely get you out of here. At that moment, multiple footsteps echoed down the corridor. Someone's here. Susan braced herself. I'll buy us some time. You two, get out through the back. Right then, two researchers burst into the room. Susan tried to stop them. But they shoved her aside and reached for the alarm button. Not so fast. James acted swiftly, landing a precise front kick to one researcher's abdomen, sending him staggering down. As the other attacked, James coolly stepped back and stopped him with a sharp counterstrike. So you really did take karate? Mary gasped. James smiled bashfully and pulled an ID card from the fallen researcher. We can open the back door with this. Hurry. James. Linda called out weakly. Thank you for coming. Susan quickly picked up the fallen researcher's smartphone and manipulated it. I've stopped their routine communication. But the other researchers will suspect something soon. We need to hurry. The four hurried down the dark corridor. Mary and James supported Linda from both sides, while Susan led with utmost caution. Susan had a perfect grasp of the building's layout. They moved through a deserted back staircase and towards an emergency exit. Occasionally, they stopped to listen for noises from afar. We're almost there. Susan whispered. Just past this emergency exit. Linda's steps became unstable, possibly due to the effects of the medication, as sweat beaded on her forehead. Are you okay? Mary looked at her daughter with concern. Yes, just about. Linda smiled weakly. It's been a long time since I smelled Mom's scent. Mary nearly hugged her daughter tightly but restrained herself. They needed to focus on escaping. The stairs are right up ahead. Susan pointed after stopping. Suddenly, alarms rang throughout the building, and red lights ominously illuminated the corridors. We've been found. I'll stand guard. James positioned himself. You three go ahead. No. Linda said with a trembling voice. I don't want anyone else to be a victim. We all go together. Footsteps approached from upstairs. The encirclement was tightening moment by moment. Then, all the lights in the corridor went out. Susan had manipulated the internal wiring. Now. Susan's voice cut through the darkness. The emergency exit is open. In the darkness, the four rushed up the stairs. The pursuers from above were confused by the sudden blackout and stopped. The cold night air brushed their cheeks. Once they were outside, the four continued running, blending into the shadows of the building. Susan's car was parked a short distance away. Wait. Linda stopped halfway. The USB, the evidence. Here. Susan pulled it out of her coat pocket. I've also taken a backup. It's safe now. Buckle up. Mary supported Linda in the back seat. James sat in the passenger seat, and Susan took the wheel. The engine hummed quietly into the night. Susan skillfully navigated through the complex roads of the industrial area. There was no sign of pursuit. To the Maria convent. Tommy is waiting there. As James's voice filled the car, Linda leaned against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom, for worrying you. It's okay. Mary squeezed her daughter's hand. We're safe now. Street lights passed by the car windows. The nightmarish time seemed to be finally coming to an end. When the church came into view, the sky was just beginning to brighten. In the pre-dawn silence, Susan quietly rang the church bell. Soon, Sister Maria appeared, seemingly understanding the situation, and quietly opened the door. Tommy is sleeping in the chapel. The nun smiled softly. As they entered the stone building, Tommy, awakened by a small noise, ran towards them. Daddy. His voice echoed in the solemn chapel. The moment James lifted his son, Linda knelt down behind them. Tommy reached out from his father's arms towards Linda. Mommy. Linda, with tears in her eyes, held her son's little hand. I'm sorry for making you worry. Mary watched this scene, feeling warmth in her chest. Susan stepped forward. Let's go to the police now. I will testify. About the experiments, all of it. Me too. Linda stood up, supported by her mother, her gaze filled with resolute determination. I will reveal the whole truth. Sister Maria opened the stained glass windows of the chapel. The morning sun streamed in, heralding the start of a new day. Let's go, Mary said, embracing her daughter's shoulder. But before that, let's all rest a bit. You too, everyone. James approached Linda with Tommy in his arms and gently reached out to her. A deep, unspoken trust flowed between them. Mary watched the people quietly standing in the solemn chapel, her daughter, Tommy, and James. She felt a strange sense of emotion seeing them. Not related by blood, yet bound by deep affection. And as the morning sun grew stronger, it gently enveloped the chapel. In the weeks that followed, events moved quickly. The evidence stored on the USB and the testimonies of Susan and Linda brought the pharmaceutical company's illegal experiments into the light. The inhumane experiments on homeless people, data tampering, and the attempted confinement of Linda, all were exposed. Linda, as a social affairs reporter, carefully compiled the series of events into an article. The article sparked significant reactions, shedding light on the darkness lurking in society. Susan, as a whistleblower, provided crucial testimony and received a suspended sentence in recognition of her full cooperation with the investigation, avoiding a prison term. Afterwards, she began a new path as a researcher in medical ethics, seeking to atone for her past mistakes. After the incident, Linda moved in with Mary, and James and Tommy visited frequently. Tommy was particularly fond of Linda, and she warmly embraced the boy. Your cooking has improved, Linda remarked as she stroked Tommy's hair, while James prepared dinner in the kitchen. Yeah. Daddy's teaching me, Tommy proudly responded. Mary, listening to the three of them from the kitchen, smiled unconsciously. Since the incident, she noticed her daughter's expression had gradually softened, and the presence of James and Tommy clearly healed Linda's heart. Mom, why don't you join us? Linda called out. Mary hesitated for a moment but then walked towards the kitchen, drawn by the smell of dinner, reminiscent of the warmth of a family. "I'll help out." Mary picked up an apron, and Tommy greeted her with a delighted smile. Time slowly passed for the newly bonded family. Then, one Saturday morning as Mary was cleaning the living room, the doorbell rang. Opening it, she found James and Tommy standing there, with Tommy clutching a small paper bag. "Good morning." James smiled. "This morning, Tommy wanted to make pancakes, so we brought some ingredients." "Yeah. We're making pancakes." Tommy held up the bag. "Well, thank you." Mary welcomed them in. Linda, who had been reading, looked up at Tommy's voice. "Good morning, Tommy." Linda smiled, and Tommy ran up to her, placing the bag on her lap. "I want to make pancakes with Mommy." "That's great. Mommy, look." Tommy began pulling ingredients out in the kitchen. "Daddy said to mix it all together." Linda smiled gently at Tommy's innocent excitement. Mary, watching her daughter's face, felt warmth in her heart. "I'll continue cleaning," Mary said naturally, wanting to give them their own space. "Oh, no." James quickly spoke up. "Mary, I have something important to discuss." "Something important?" "Yes." James's voice was sincere. "I want to marry Linda. Tommy adores her as his mom." "James." Linda came from the kitchen and gently touched his arm. "Let me speak." Linda looked directly at Mary. "Mom, I want to marry James and start a new family. But that doesn't mean leaving you. We want to continue as a family, just as before. I want you to be Tommy's grandmother." "Pancakes are sticking." Tommy's cry from the kitchen brought smiles to their faces. "Let's go." Mary headed to the kitchen. "Let's make it together. All of us as a family." Linda's eyes teared up at those words. After Linda and James married, Linda moved into a new home. But their house remained lively with frequent weekend visits. Tommy affectionately called Mary Grandma. Mary often reflected on the warm bonds they might never have formed if not for the incident. Life sometimes brings unexpected encounters that teach us new forms of family. Family isn't just about blood relations, it's about caring for and supporting each other, nurturing invaluable bonds.